Hello, welcome to Biblio Files, the show on AADL TV, where we take a few moments each week to discuss one topic all about books. My name is Amanda, and with me, as always, are Christopher and Lucy. And this week, the topic we are discussing, we are talking about books that contain magical realism, which I'm excited to hear everybody's picks for today. So Lucy, what did you bring to share?
Well, I actually read a new book. I haven't read magical realism in a really long time. And this is a book that came out in 2021. It's called The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, and it's by Zoraida Cordova. And it is the story of Orquídea, and it's actually a multi-generational story. So she's sort of the matriarch in the middle of it, but it goes both ways. Like, it talks about her parents, and it also talks about her children. And Orquídea has, I'm going to show you the family tree, which is actually a tree. She's in the middle, so like there's her, so it's very complicated because she has 5 husbands. So anyway, she has always had these sort of powerful magical abilities that are very mysterious to her family, to her kids. And she sends out this invitation to all of her children and her, like all of her relatives, saying that you have to come to my house, which is in Ecuador. I am dying. My death is imminent. So you need to come. And they all think, oh, we're going to get our inheritance. This is great. And so they all travel to where she is, and they realize, which they should have realized because they receive the letters in really weird ways. Like, it'll just appear on their desk or come in through their windows. All her magic is being applied here. She's not dying, but she's transforming. And with this transformation, she's giving to each family member sort of a unique gift and some wisdom about how they can use it. And with that gift, there also comes a curse, depending on how it is used. So then the story goes through, it goes back and forth. It'll go through some of her children and what they're experiencing and her siblings. And then it goes back to her childhood and her mother. And then Orquídea ran away to be with the circus. She was born unlucky, is what they always say about her, but she really knows how to bargain. She's very smart, and so she can bargain even with magical creatures that she meets. So she's always kind of getting into these unique situations and always coming out on top. And so she's in the circus, and then that's where she meets her first husband. And then she gets married 4 more times. So there are so many characters in this book that I was glad to have that family tree in the beginning. It gets a little complicated, but each of the characters has a name that is like extremely significant to that character and their traits. And some of the names the author explains, like Orquídea means orchid, and there's a reason why she's named that. Some of the names the author doesn't explain, but I did read an interview with her where she was like, I spent so much time on these names, just like this is, so that's was really interesting and part of what made the book, I think, so well written. And just in general, this author is a great writer. She's written about 12 other books. I think this is her first adult book. And her writing is just beautiful. And she weaves, I think, the magical realism in really well, which is something that with magical realism can be tricky, I think, because you don't want to be like jarred out of the story by a detail that doesn't ring true to you. So I thought she did a great job with that. And she also uses a lot of Spanish in the book, which sort of enhances the narrative as well. So I really, really enjoyed this. And it is great to see, like, books, I think, I think of older books when I think of magical realism. So I enjoyed reading something new. So that is The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. Christopher, what did you think?
Well, I went with Milan Kundera's The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And I know that Kundera is not someone that people often think of for magical realism, but he was actually the first author I read after I had learned of this idea, and he uses it to great effect in many of his books. It was also interesting to pick this book back up after so long because part of the book is about Soviet tanks invading Czechoslovakia. And I think it's very appropriate to be thinking about this right now again. The book is a collection. It's not really a collection of short stories, even though it is 7 short stories. And I say it's not really a collection because it's such a non-traditional book of these stories. Even though there are themes that are woven in through all the stories, it really feels like much more of a whole book, because Kundera weaves in his own autobiographical stories, memories of his father, and history through all the stories. And there are also recurring characters from one story to the next. So it's kind of really not accurate to just call it a collection of 7 short stories, because they're really not independent. So the magical realism really comes in a few places. There's one great long scene where Tamina, this woman, goes to this island, and it's completely populated by children. And all the children are wholly innocent, and they have no memories of anything. And that really lets them do all kinds of terrible things because they have no memory of what they're doing. And Kundera, of course, plays a lot on memory and laughter in this book, hence the title. And this is really kind of looking at communism, that when you are full of joy for the future and you're totally ignoring the past, it allows you to commit terrible atrocities. And he's really likening these communists with these children in the book. There are other great scenes where people are floating up in the air from pure joy and this kind of look at the future. And he's also tying in themes from Ionesco's The Rhinoceros, which is also a play of magical realism. So there's so much in this book. It's really packed, and it's strangely fitting to pick it back up today after so long. So, Amanda, what did you pick?
Well, both of your books sound different and fun and very realistically magical. So the book I chose to talk about today, I don't have the book to flash up, is called Everybody Sees the Ants by A.S. King. Her name is Amy. She primarily writes teen fiction, and she's known for utilizing magical realism in several of her books to depict the emotions of teenagers, which I think is a really cool way to share what's happening in a teen's voice, especially if the teen is unreliable as a teenage narrator, which I really appreciate. So this book features a 15-year-old boy named Lucky Linderman, and his name is ironic because he is not very lucky. His family is scarred by the disappearance of his grandfather in Vietnam in the 70s, and his father, who is the son, his father has shut down. He is not good at showing his emotions. He's distant, and his mother and father aren't having a great marriage. So the mother spends a lot of her time outside the home. She escapes by swimming laps in the pool. And then on top of that, Lucky is being bullied at school. So you've got a lot of like heavy hitting things going on at home. And then when his grandmother dies, his grandmother tells Lucky, save your grandfather, bring him home to me. And so the night that he talks to his grandmother before she dies, he starts having these very vivid, real dreams where he is in Vietnam as a war hero trying to rescue or break his grandfather out of a prison camp in Vietnam. But when Lucky wakes up in present day, he's holding a tangible physical souvenir or a piece of something, an artifact from something that was in the dream. So that's a bit of the magical realism. But so there's a lot going on in the story. It's dark, it's heavy. You've got this boy who's really, really struggling. He's being bullied. He doesn't know how to handle it. He doesn't know if he can take another day of it. And his parents, who are involved and absorbed in their own marital issues and their family issues, and having this father who disappeared in Vietnam, they're still struggling day to day with that. Lucky's at a loss. He doesn't know if he can take it. And he has an exceptionally bad experience with the bully, and his mother takes him to Arizona to visit family as a distraction for herself and for him. And things do get a little bit lighter there. He meets a girl and there's some nice banter with them. But on this trip is also when Lucky starts to see the ants. And the ants are literally ants, and they end up acting as sort of a Greek chorus where they offer insight into what Lucky is feeling or thinking. They also add humor. I mean, the book has some heavy topics going on, so they add a little bit of humor, and you're able to see some insight into some of the struggles and thoughts that Lucky is feeling as all of this is going on in his life. I really enjoy this author's writing. Amy King is one of my favorite authors. I love her teen books, and when I was trying to pick a book for today, I was like, oh, I've read most of her books, and many of them contain magical realism. And I just remember really, really enjoying this book. This came out in 2013, I believe, and I read it a couple of years after, and I've only read it once, and I just really like this. One of my favorites by her. It just has these examples of this teenager who is struggling, these parents who are also struggling. They don't know how to parent the son who's being bullied. They don't know how to handle him and their own trauma and drama. You've also got this multi-generational effect of the Vietnam War going on within the son whose father were MIA, and then the grandson who is dreaming and trying to like save his grandfather in his dream. So it's very interesting. There's a lot going on. I really love it. And then the end, you're really, really rooting for Lucky. You want him to make it. You want him and his parents to figure out what can they do? How can they get through this day and the next day and the next day and make it? So that is Everybody Sees the Ants by A.S. King. Christopher, Lucy, do either of you have any final thoughts or comments on magical realism or about anything we've talked about today?
I have a question.
Please.
Does magical realism seem to be most common in Spanish language countries with Spanish authors? Or
I think traditionally, like I feel like that's might be I feel like that could be true or perceived to be true because you think of like Garcia Marquez or Isabel Allende or, you know, some of these like bigger authors who've been writing or who are very famous for these big books and contain magical realism. But I don't know. Like, I think what you're saying, Amanda, is it can be used effectively in like YA books to kind of help, you know, explain things in the same way that mythology almost does. So I don't know. I mean, we only had one book here that was Spanish speaking. So I think that's kind of a good representation.
Yeah, I think some of the other books we've read in the past have a lot of magical realism in them, but are not from Spanish speaking countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Lucy, you talked about Night Bitch, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't you consider that magical realism?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, because I was trying to think like what's, you know, there's a difference between magical realism and fantasy, right? It's almost like, so magical realism is bringing magic into our world, right? Fantasy is a different world, I guess. I don't know. Something that's very vague. But so, yeah, I think sometimes when you think of a book, like I hadn't thought of Night Bitch as being magical realism, but it absolutely is, and very effectively, you know, and used as a way to explain like a situation in her current life. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's why with this particular author, Amy A.S. King, she really does it in a lot of her books where she has these elements that sort of help tell the story or able to see a view that you wouldn't see if it was just the straight head-on narrator or even somebody telling a story. It just gives you a little bit of and I like the fact that it's not full-on fantasy. It just gives you that little extra piece of something like these little marching ants, like narrating what's going on in this teen's head. It just gives you something else about the book. And so I hadn't really thought about this author, A.S. King's, a lot of her collection being magical realism until I went to try to find a book to talk about today. And I was like, I could pick a bunch of her books, you know, and I didn't really think about it when I was reading it. I just enjoyed that as a plot device, sort of, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. So that's a good question, Christopher. And I can't share any more about it because I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know either. I think it's a great question. I mean, like the book I picked, I think is billed as magical realism. That's the way it was marketed. But it, you know, I think magical realism is out there in a lot of different books. So
Right. Maybe that's just a kind of outmoded way of thinking about it, you know.
Maybe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. So everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Bibliophiles. We sure enjoy getting together on these days to talk about books. And if you have a book that you consider magical realism that you want to share with us and recommend, please do. You can click the link below. It'll take you to the library's website where you can leave a comment. If you just want to chat about books or recommend books, please let us know. Please do so. And we will see you next time for another episode of Bibliophiles.